group work can send students in a frenzy, and it can also challenge lecturers. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And in the final part of the presentation, I'll explore whether there is any evidence that group work may be better for students' wellbeing. And I think the answer is yes, of course, if it's done properly. So by the time students come to us, they've been doing lots of group work, high school, primary school, everywhere. So, and also in the workplace, co-design principles are very important, a central part of innovation, a central part of certainly the IT industry and many other industries, although I'm not sure if it's a central part of the legal industry. So navigating conflict and differing views of fellow employees or peers is part of getting the job done. And I think I love what Richard said. I wrote this down, Richard. The positive dimensions of interruption, conflict, and tension. I'm going to continue to write that down, the positive dimensions. And that's really odd, given that lawyers are conflict resolution specialists, right? But in my experience, lawyers are bad at it and law students aren't good at it either. So this is just some of the reading I did on group work. There's some of the literature I found, and this is more about assessment of group work rather than group work itself, so assessing group work. So this is a definition that I would like to focus on that I've got here. It's defined as a learning phenomenon where individuals in a social constellation within a physical and or virtual environment interact on the same or different aspects of a shared task to accomplish, I guess, a particular goal. So that's a very simple definition. So the key feature is obviously the collaboration. And the key to the assessment of it is the operationalization of relevant processes and outcomes and their subsequent measurement. Now, the way we measure it will drive what the students will focus on because they're very strategic and they want to get good marks. So the way it is measured and what is measured is what drives the behavior and behavioral outcomes. So what's really important in my experience is defining those learning outcomes and how you define that in the rubric and how students are marked. It's very important in group work to have some autonomy and individual aspects to the assessment because there's the free rider problem, and that is everywhere in the literature that I read. The free rider problem, we all know it, probably we've all been in workplaces where we've had that. So someone does all the work and the other's free ride, or one or two free rides. So that's been the potential source of most conflict that I've had emails from students about. That's been their grievance. That's why they don't like it. They feel it's not fair, someone's done more, someone's done less. So there has to be some individual responsibility. So that's in most of the literature I've read, that is the best practice, that you design a group assessment with group collaborative elements, but you need some individual elements that are marked so the individual still must produce something on their own. Now, of course, there's just a general group submission of assessment, and it assumes all students have achieved the same common knowledge and learning outcome. As I said, students are marks driven, and they'll focus on what's in the rubric, the marking rubric. And group work can be used as a real learning tool to help students become better collaborators. But in my experience, the issue is I need support. I need skills development in how to do that too. And this has definitely come out in the literature where lecturers, teachers need support and in how to support students. We are good at assessing discipline-specific knowledge, so the cognitive aspects of what students are learning. But there are other dimensions, the soft skills, and how do we assess that? How do we put that in a rubric? How do we measure that? And then there's the social and motivational dimensions of group learning as well. So let's look at the social and motivational. And I've already mentioned the cognitive. We're very good at assessing the cognitive. So that means knowing a legal principle and applying it to a set of facts. We're all very good, and lecturers generally are very good at that in my discipline. But how do you then assess the example of the social dimension? So the intergroup relations and the dynamics there. And then there is the motivational dimensions. And I think that's important because when one is motivated to do something, they generally do pretty well at it. And they generally report high levels of satisfaction. And it can be defined as the student's reasons for their performance or success. in my view, it's harder to assess that, but or it can only be a satisfaction survey about how students feel about something. So my first experience early on when I was an academic was we had a pure group work assignment with no individual elements. And this was done really badly, and thus lots of conflict arose in the student cohort. So one type of group assessment that did not work is students were put into groups. So the system, the computer, whatever, allocated them into groups. They didn't get a choice about it. That is a big cross. All the literature suggests don't do that. Don't do that because it's going to lead to conflict. They don't feel autonomous, and autonomy is a very important part of well-being in not just in university, but in everything we do. So the problems, I've listed some of them there. Complaints requesting to opt out and do it by themselves. That was the first email I got all the time. Complaints criticizing other students for not doing enough, alleged plagiarism complaints, complaints that other group members were not cooperative and things like that, or they just didn't like their group members, and those sorts of general complaints that I was getting. And now this was quite overwhelming because I had a student cohort of 300 students. So you can imagine all I needed was about 20 of them to do that. And that put me over the edge, in some respects. So then learnings from that assessment, students should have self-selected their groups, as I said. And the aims, in my view, the aims of the assessment were not clearly identified at the time. And we needed to teach students how to do group work. We needed to give them a lecture on it, some literature on it, so they could contemplate the aims of group work as well and learn something from it, because maybe they didn't know that, And as I said, there were the practical realities too of the student cohort. Now, this is my most recent experience, which is a more positive one. And it's a subject I'm teaching at the moment and coordinating. It's an individual assessment with group components. So it's really an individual assessment, but for them to complete the task, they've got to get into a group and complete a task. So students chose their fellow group members of 3. So they get a chance to choose. Then I give them a date, and if they haven't done it by that date, I then put them into groups. It's a client interview, simulated client interview online. They had to do that on Zoom. Each student gets to be an observer, a client, or a lawyer, and they're given confidential instructions relating to each role. Now, part of the assessment is I use the word loosely of being creative in relation to finding solutions to ethical problems that arose out of those scenarios. So that's it's nowhere near as creative as comedy and music and drama, but that was my aim. Now, I don't know whether I had a concrete idea of what I was trying to get them to do, but I was thinking from my own experience when I was having some, I guess, ethical dilemma with clients, and then I had to just innovate and think about how to find a solution. So the scenarios have to give the student enough material to be able to go down that path. Then students arranged a time and they had to do the interviews, and they submitted an individual reflection as their role as observer. Now, what I did differently is the marking rubric had a specific allocation of marks to discussing their experiences of working in a group. And I had also given them some literature about it, and we'd also discussed it. So based on the supporting material, I wanted them to talk about that and write some reflection on it. For the first time in a long time, I hardly had any, no one emailed me. One did, and then they quickly resolved it. So I guess that's a success. I haven't done any, thorough empirical research on students' attitudes, but that was a success from my perspective. And then it was what was written in the reflections themselves. So yeah, and as I said, I'd revised the assessment. The original assessment gave little opportunity to overtly assess group processes and outcomes, and then I redesigned it to assess that. And all it was I asked students to reflect on it in their reflection. And I think what I felt when I was reading some of the reflections is I was wondering whether the students were writing what they thought I wanted to hear. So I don't know, that's one thing we all have to be mindful of when we have, reflection as part of assessment as well. And I'm not really sure how to counteract that. I'm still contemplating that one. And because, again, when they're marks driven, they think, oh, she wants to hear this, I better put this in, She doesn't want to hear that I hated it, which I did actually want to hear that I hated it. So maybe I have to give them some specific instruction on that point. Yeah. The rubric said, write your own reflections on the experience of working in a group. So my reflections in 2023, I'll give them more targeted material in the area. As I also learn more about it myself, I'll be able to be equipped to help students be supported in this area at least. And also writing reflectively for law students, I think, is another skill. They're used to writing in a very dry manner, and writing reflectively is a skill in itself for many people. And that's another skill in that it is, I guess, potentially creative as well. Now, let's go quickly to mental health and wellbeing. These are some of the materials that I've accessed, in particular, the third Enhancing Student Mental Wellbeing, a handbook for academic educators. Yeah, so I don't know if you can see what you can see down there. This is page 27, but setting group assignments is a good way of helping students develop positive peer relationships and have a feeling of connectedness or belonging. Group work can provide opportunities for positive relationships if it's done well, of course, and well designed. And if it's done poorly, students, of course, have not been supported, then that doesn't happen. In effect, it creates more stress. It probably is a hindrance to well-being. So it can be really bad for them in that regard, as I've outlined already. And I think this is just a repeat of what that quote says. So in theory, it should work. Now, and if it works well, it's very high levels of satisfaction, connectedness, belonging. It's a really positive experience overall. And hopefully they can make really good friends out of it too. But when they're forced to do it, they hate it. So why do they hate it? Well, I think in my experience, they hate it because it could be an artificial exercise. They don't see the reason why they're doing it. So you need to tell them why are we doing this? In some of the literature I read was in nursing, and they do a lot of group work really well. And that was really interesting. And my view is that, when you're a nurse, you go out there, you don't want to, kill somebody, you don't want to do the wrong thing. And it's so really important for them to learn how to work collaboratively because the impact is immediate. Possibly in law, they don't feel that impact so immediately and they feel it's artificial. So their motivation isn't there to take it seriously. So perhaps that's one of the reasons. So the answer is to identify the major features of one's profession and make it more authentic. So just in summary, well-designed group learning assessments include the following: autonomy, belonging, a motivation. So motivation, and I think that's connected to authenticity of the assessment, and of course, student support, so they can navigate potential conflict as well. And these are my final thoughts. Academics generally work alone. That's been my experience at least, and we need support too. And in my undergraduate years, I formed my own group, study groups, and made my best friends, and they're still my friends today. So I had a lovely time, but I don't know that's what's happening today. I hope it is, but I'm not sure. So that's it. Thank you.